All right, sir. Good morning again. Good morning.
Hey, good morning.
So there's this. I find it so funny. We're just talking about the internet, the things that are going on the internet, versus now it seems like what we see is so curated based on what we have going on in our life and what we want to see and what our interests are. And so it's like, yeah, it's tough to know sometimes, like when I see things in the news or I see things on my feed, is like, well, is this what's going on for the world, or is this what's going on for me? Like, is this really the internet, or is it my internet? Is it your internet? Like, we all have this different curated experience.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah. It's a good observation, man. It's a very good reminder that what we see is very likely not an objective view of what's going on right now. It's a curated view for us based on whatever platform and whatever algorithm we're in.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, never mind the internet, but I know I've heard so many times that it's the idea that we don't see life as it is. We see life as we are,
Hmm.
and whatever we are projecting out, I mean, life ends up being the reality ends up being a mirror of on the outside what's on the inside for us.
Right.
So
Yeah. Our bias, our filters, our stories.
yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. We
Yeah.
live in these little echo chambers within our own minds, these little bubbles within our own minds, and there are billions of us on the earth, and all of our little bubbles are colliding with one another all the time throughout the day, and we have these little bubbles that we're carrying around with us that are also colliding with all these things and creating their own little bubbles, and somehow through the years we all figure things out. We all kind of make it through.
Yeah. It's but I mean, man, it's like, oh, there's so much work. Like there's our own filters, there are our own bias, our own lens, as you're saying, in terms of how we see the world. And then there's the world that, has its own stories in terms of like you think something is what it is, and then you realize that it's not what you thought it was. Like the whole matrix, right? It's like, oh, I thought this was what I was supposed to do in life. Or like part of my story, I thought I just needed to get a job and get married, and that's how you live a happy life. But then, like, no, you get kind of knocked off that path, go on your own hero's journey, and realize that there's a whole other world available and a whole other, potentially path for yourself. Anyways, and just all these systems, and we're into elections now. I mean, I don't know. It's just it's this onion to peel in terms of your own awareness and your own develop, as well as then when you start to look out into the world as you do your own work, then you realize all these other things that aren't the way they used to be. Anyways, yeah.
It's a fascinating thing.
Yes. It's like golf.
And
There's just you're never gonna have it all figured out. And you could drive yourself nuts playing the game, or you could really just take a moment and appreciate that you're out in nature and do your best to enjoy the game, even though it can be really frustrating at times.
yeah, very much, very much. So I know one thing that is on our internet uh, more and more these days, which I think is great, is this is a bunch of ideas and concepts and practices about how we relate to each other as you know us with our spouses, us with our kids, and how kids grow up. And there's this whole idea around what they call attachment styles and how we like how we bond with each other. So what are some of the things that I know you've had a lot of stuff and you've been reading some great books, parenting books about attachment styles. Tell me about some of the stuff you've uncovered, some of the stuff you've learned over the last little bit.
Yeah, I love this topic. I think because again, it's one of these unseen forces. Like it's one of these filters, right? These one of these things that can affect our own lens and on the world. And if we don't know about it, to me, you could be behaving in a way that's completely not what you want, but not know how to behave any differently or show up any differently. And not even, yeah. And then also, based on how we show up, ultimately we can be infecting how our kids are going to end up developing and showing up in the world. So I just think this whole concept, and again on my internet, on your internet, it seems quite popular these days in terms of attachment styles, in terms of anxious avoidant, dismissive avoidant. If you just go and start to look up some of the stuff right now, you're gonna go and probably see a whole bunch more of it after that. But I just think, yeah, at least for me, it was just this huge, oh my goodness, like a huge aha in terms of stuff I can work on. Like, okay, yeah, I realize why my some of my golf shots aren't going the way I want because, I got to work on my swing. And then, okay, the other great thing about that is the more work I do on this, it also is going to really help my kids in terms of how they show up.
So what are some of the things like what's something that kind of just stuck out for you as like oh wow, like maybe something surprising that you found out.
The first one, so there's a few books too. The first one was a year ago. I read called Hold Me Tight. And I read two of her books. The other one was Love Sense. And unfortunately, the author passed, Sue Johnson. She passed earlier this year. I don't know. Yeah, I didn't know she wasn't well, and she certainly wasn't that old, but she's written some amazing books. And the big aha for me from her book was that this idea of attachment styles stays with us in our adult relationships. So, not if we're not aware of it as a parent, and we're not ultimately trying to help our kids grow up to feel secure and safe in that relationship, they will carry it forward into their adult relationships and onwards with their spouse, and then they'll end up potentially projecting it back onto their kids. Like you can get this perpetual cycle, potentially, without somebody waking up and realizing that, oh, I better, I'm not, I'm responsible for how I show up. And that's super important work because that affects how my kids show up, and that's going to affect how they show up for the rest of, So that was one huge awareness, was that book, which I highly recommend for anyone who is in any kind of relationship. Hold Me Tight.
Is that kind of like the idea that we've all heard, like that like guys marry their mothers and girls marry their fathers, that sort of thing, like how we relate to our parents, like we kind of bring that into our intimate relationships.
A lot of times, potentially, yeah. Like I'm just trying to think of that for a second because a lot of times there will be a dynamic. Like if well, I'll touch base. So I did what anyone would do nowadays. I asked Chat GPT to create a PowerPoint presentation for me. So I have a few slides on attachment styles, but based on how we were parented. So if our mom was a certain way and we developed a certain attachment style as a kid, then we will likely get into a relationship later on that helps offset that dynamic. So, as an example, if we develop an anxious attachment style, which happens when our primary caregivers are inconsistent or intrusive. So, if we're anxious about how to deal with our own emotions, and we never got really a lot of help with that consistently as a young one, or they were, or our parents were anxious, and like, I think we talked about helicopter parents. Like if they were in our world, oh, too much, like intrusive, like if their
Mm-hmm.
anxiety ended up starting to be imprinted on us, then when we get into a relationship later on in life, we might end up finding somebody that offsets that. So maybe it won't necessarily be our mother, but it might be, or maybe if our father was like that too in our world, then we will find someone who will offset that. Typically, someone who's avoidant, so who's the offset of that. So they someone gets to be anxious in the relationship, the other person gets to be avoidant, which means that they grew up where their primary caregivers were emotionally unavailable, so they had to figure out everything on their own. So someone who's avoidant is typically someone who's very, very independent, and they won't. If there ever is a conflict, they will just turn away and deal with it on their own. So
Mm.
you can get this interesting dynamic where someone's anxious to want to fix things in a relationship, and if there's any kind of conflict, they want to solve it right away, and they can get yeah, really anxious about that. And then they might find someone who will help them stay in that anxiety, because the other person will just turn away and not want to deal with it. So you can perpetually live out these attachment styles if you're not aware of them, I guess.
Right. Cool. So how do you feel that that plays out? Like, or how's that playing out for you as you're learning this?
So with Hold Me Tight, that was a huge awareness in terms of just how I can better show up in relationship with my wife in that context. This latest book, it's called, so this kind of ties into our conversation last week. This one's called The Power of Showing Up by Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson. I recommend anything by Dan Siegel. I read earlier this year The Yes Brain, and I mean, just I really resonate with his perspective on how to help, you know, how to work on your own golf game. How do we show, like, this book here, The Power of Showing Up? Like, how do we show up the best that we can and become aware of some things? Like in this book, it's attachment styles, and then how to then ultimately show up as the best father we can for our kids as well. Then how do we bring that best self and support them in their own development?
Mm.
So in this book, in terms of this lens, the big thing is, I really like, in here, there's a whole section on being aware of how we're showing up and then how to work on that
Yeah.
if we're not, showing up as the ultimate best self that we know we can. And then ultimately, how do we show up in a way that, using child development science that these guys know, how do we show up in the best way to support our kids become secure, confident, whole?
Right. So, what's the answer?
So,
How do you do it?
well, you could start by reading this book. I mean, but the big points, uh, a for me would be to know yourself. So as we talk about, bring it inward first. Don't just be the golf coach that's telling everyone else how to play, but you suck yourself. You got to get on the range. You got to get on the course and do your own work first. So the first is identifying your own attachment style, in my opinion. And you can earn so the ultimate goal well, at least according to him, and I agree with ourselves and with our kids, is to earn a secure attachment. So feel secure within ourselves. And that typically develops when you have caregivers that are consistent and responsive, which is the biggest part of this whole book, which is the power of showing up. Like, first and foremost, like, be there, like, show up. And then it's like, okay, well, there's a quality to showing up as well. It's not just being there and being completely,
Right.
not present, but there's a quality to how you show up. So the first step is figuring out your own attachment style and how to show up as a secure, the attached individual yourself. And then how do you develop that within your kid? And one of the ultimate goals in child development is to help them develop a secure attachment with you so that they feel safe. And there's four S's here: so that they feel safe, seen, soothed, and secure. And if you can help a child
Mm.
have those four S's, feel them through childhood, that gives them the best chance at feeling secure within themselves, and then go out in the world and be able to do great things,
Right.
or just be themselves. And then from that place, watch what unfolds.
Yeah. It reminds me of I remember growing up. There's a funny moment that we had, but to talk about like the consistency of like, first we have to be the thing to then teach it to our kids. And our kids don't often learn by what we're telling them, but they're learning by who we're being. And we were sitting around the kitchen table one night, and I think it was my brother and my sister. So we have four kids in our family. I think it was one of my brothers and my sister were like bugging each other or something like that, and one of them hit the other, and my mom went over and she smacked my brother across the chest shoulder, and she said, "Don't hit," as she's hitting him. And we all caught on to what happened, and we all busted out laughing. And it ended up being this like meme type thing, this recurring joke that we have in our family that, my mom says, just do something that because I said it, not because I did it, right? And like do what I say, not what I do. And it became like this meme in our family about that. but it was, but I'm appreciative of the fact that we had the awareness, and my mom and my dad also had the awareness that that was super inconsistent. It was almost, it was the literally the polar opposite of what she was saying. She did herself, and I'm glad we could all see the irony in that and get a lesson from that. But how many times do we, I can think for myself about wanting my kids to be regulated, wanting them to stay calm, wanting them not to have an outburst, wanting them to not have a meltdown, yet I'm having a meltdown myself. Like I'm not doing the thing. Like I'm yelling at them. Granted, I don't yell. Like I wouldn't say I've ever yelled. I don't know if I've ever yelled at my kids, but like being super stern with them about being loving, or something like that. That's how I'm just being the opposite of what I'm asking them to be, and I can see how that is so not like that is very confusing for a child. Never mind, it's confusing for an adult. We see it with
Yeah.
our own relationships, especially the closer we are to people when they act at opposition to what they say or who they say they are, yet they're acting very, very different. It's like, huh? Like there's just like, yeah, there's an interference there that is very, very tricky to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of the quote, people won't typically remember what you said or what you did, but they'll remember how you made them feel.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, the big thing is owning your own attachment style and how to identify it. So there's four of them. There's four different, well, they've grouped them into four different attachment styles. Securely attached, which is the, ultimate goal. Anxiously attached, avoidant attachment, and disorganized attachment. So, very quickly, if you are securely attached, you likely feel comfortable with intimacy and trust in relationships. You seek closeness, but also enjoy independence. So you're okay being by yourself. You're okay being in a relationship. You're okay when things start to get, closer and closer and closer, more committed and more, intimate. Like that is your nervous system is good with that and quite comfortable with that. Which I can't remember the stats. It's something like 50% of people would have this. And these attachment styles are also relational. Like you might feel securely attached in one relationship, but not in a different one.
Mm.
So it can be relational based on the other person. I mean, this is where you get into the fascinating part about dynamics, especially in a family, when you've got so many different dynamics going on between, if you, in our house, so we got 5 people. So there's like 20 different relationships in that environment, something like that.
Right, right.
Uh, so, so anxious attachment. You may feel insecure in relationships, often worrying about abandonment or not being valued by others. You seek reassurance and validation frequently. So again, this one develops typically when your primary caregiver is inconsistent or intrusive, and you have this your own insecurity and your own anxiety, and you're always worried about the other person, leaving you. So, someone might behave quite jealous or, obsessive or, oh, why didn't you get back to me? I texted you an hour ago. So there's always this worry and they're needing that anxiety within them to be calmed down externally from your partner. You're putting this on them to reassure you because you never got this as a kid.
Mm.
So the other one, yeah, the other big one is avoidant attachment. So these two would be the most common. The stuff I see a lot on the internet right now is around avoidant attachment. So you may avoid emotional closeness, preferring independence and self-reliance. You tend to minimize feelings and distance yourself from others. So again, this is someone whose primary caregivers weren't emotionally available for them. So they didn't learn how to deal with, any of these big emotions that come up with kids, right? I mean, there's all kinds with my 7-year-old right now that she's learning. You can see it developmentally. She's getting into some really big emotions, and I can see it. Like if I didn't know myself how to deal with my own, then I wouldn't stand a chance in terms of helping her develop and learn how to deal with her own. And so if someone doesn't and they go through phases like this where they've got big emotions, then they start to realize that, or think that, okay, I guess I just got to figure this out on my own. And so their behavior would be to, they don't, it's interesting because any closeness actually makes them feel uncomfortable because they don't want to feel those feelings. They didn't necessarily learn how to. And so
Mm,
this is where, someone with this attachment style in an intimate relationship will actually start to pull away the more it starts to get close,
right.
potentially.
Yeah. And what was the last one?
Disorganized attachment. So this one's the most complex and more rare. And this one stems from someone who their primary caregivers, what's the definition here, were frightening or unpredictable. So they
Mm,
don't, it's hard for them to relate to the world because growing up, the very person that they wanted safety and security from, their parents, was actually the source of fear for them. So they, have this, evolutionary need to feel close to that person, but at the same time, this evolutionary, fright, they didn't feel safe with that person. Like that person was traumatic for them. They were abusive. So they grow up with this disorganized attachment style, which is you might feel a mix of fear and desire for closeness. Your relationships could feel confusing or unstable due to conflicting emotions or seeking comfort while fearing it. So, as
yeah,
they
that
describe in the book,
sounds
yeah,
that's very confusing.
yeah, they don't have a consistent, they don't have a coherent story of their own childhood. It's still very confused within their nervous system, obviously, and therefore they, that will propagate and play out in their own relationships.
Mm. So it seems like how would somebody how do you think somebody would, so now let's say you're an adult and you're like, man, like I've got, you're whatever, maybe you're not a secure attachment style and you're recognizing that. I think for some people the impetus might be to try to litigate why they're the way that they are, and potentially, so it's that they're like, okay, well, it's because of thing with my mom, or it's because of the thing with my dad, and so rather than taking the next step and creating something new, they'll just kind of, they'll be like, well, I'm this way because,
Mm.
and sit on that, as opposed to actually doing the work, or like just blaming the other person, as opposed to recognize also that, yeah, like this may not, or this is not your fault. Like this is not, like that line from Good Will Hunting. Like it's not your fault. It's not your fault.
Hmm. Hmm.
But it is your responsibility. You are your own person at this point. You've got to then take the next step and actually try to change it. And I can understand how that could be really difficult if one, you're, let's say like your caregivers, let's say like now we're adults, our parents are older, they're also potentially way more set in their ways. They don't even recognize, they don't even know that they were like this. And so it might be, there might be an urge to like try to rehash that, all of this with your parents, which is not necessarily going to get you far. Or some of us
Yeah.
don't have our parents around anymore either. So what is, from what you've read, like what are some of the things that people can start to do to yeah, like start taking responsibility to start to change it?
Yeah. 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 So good points there. And that I wrote a quote down from this book. You are not to blame for your past, but you are responsible for how you deal with it in the present.
Right.
So just to go into what you're saying, for me, it starts with awareness. Like, it's like again, Neo in the Matrix, like waking up from the story that you were in and realizing that there's more to what's going on, right? There's like this whole other, that's to me, this whole work is like, oh my goodness, like there's this whole other world that I had no idea what's going on here that's affecting me in the reality I thought that I knew. So for me, it's the first part is awareness, and then figuring out if you want something different. Like if you want to just blame your parents and not deal with it, well, then it can be hard, right? It can be difficult. And do you want to be, do you want to be a better golfer? Like, do you want to have a better golf game? Like, are you okay with being frustrated on the course and shanking the ball off in the bushes? Like, if you want to be better at the game and teach your kids how to be better at the game, then you gotta start doing the work, and you typically do need someone who can see what's going on. You can get some help. For me, I realize that I have a bit more of an anxious attachment style. Like I'm not, at least I used to, and I'm working. This is the piece I'm working on it, and I don't need my parents to be any different. Like I've had this conversation with them, like they're a lot, quite a lot older, and they did the absolute best they could, but they didn't get some of these tools. They certainly from their parents didn't learn how to deal with big emotions. I never got that skill growing up, and so when things aren't well with any of my relationships, I don't like that. Like it doesn't sit well with me. I'm not extremely anxious. Like I don't start texting them and get all freaked out why they're not responding to me, but it doesn't sit well with me. I'm the one who typically I want to fix it. I want to solve the people's problems. I don't, again, it causes me a little bit of stress when things aren't at peace. So that's my work though, is to be okay when things, to be in a better, more calm place within myself when things aren't okay,
Hmm.
and to be show up far better and more secure when things aren't okay, so that I can be that calm, person for and bring that to my kids if there has been a big rupture. So yeah, that's my work. I mean, that's our work, is to own where we're at and earn a secure attachment within ourselves. And there's all kinds of things that I can do, anyone can do, depending on your attachment style, to get to be in a more secure place, and then be able to bring that to our kids. And now from that place, you can start to create the four S's and develop those within. And it's funny, all of these things work for ourselves too, in terms of earning secure attachment for ourselves, and then earning that and bringing that for our kids. So the four S's being, as I said before, safe, ensuring the child feels physically and emotionally safe, seen, recognizing and validating the child's emotions, soothed, helping the child calm down when distressed, and secure, creating consistent caregiving that fosters security. So in all of those we can do for ourselves, as well as then bring them to our kids.
Yeah. So how do you see yourself starting to bring that? Like how are you bringing this awareness now with your kids?
Well, like with our youngest, for example, she's going through some big emotions. And so, one of them is to, well, help her feel safe. So first S, um, you can, in terms of helping a child feel physically and emotionally safe. So, and I guess this is also seen, like helping her realize that it's okay to have these emotions. Like this is normal. Like this isn't, so, not dismissing them. I think the old school way was, oh, wipe the tears away. This isn't that big a deal. Right there, you've invalidated their personal experience, because, to her, this Lego set that just got moved around, that's a big deal that someone moved it. Now she has to find the new pieces. Like in her world, it's a big deal.
Hmm.
It's not my, it's not up to me to say that's not a big deal. It's not to me, but to her it is. So to help her feel seen and help her feel safe is like, what you're experiencing right now is legit. I get it. That could be upsetting. I can understand that. And then, physically safe, if it is something that's going on, like, I don't know, she's spooked about earthquakes right now, helping her feel safe, that like, if there is, it's going to be, helping her feel safe, perhaps in the environment, helping her feel safe about some of these ideas. Um, they also mention, and she's got what can also be helpful is helping them set up a calm cave, so that they have a space that they feel safe in. And I realize she's got one. She likes to go when she gets overwhelmed sometimes, and she doesn't know, and she wants to be able to. The key here is to help a child self-regulate, and so that's one of the keys in terms of the emotional piece here. Is so having them help them establish a calm cave. So she's got one in one of our clothes closets where she likes to go and hide, and it's dark and it feels probably really cozy, and she can go in there and allow the emotions to come down.
Hmm.
So yeah, safe and seen. There's some key things that I'm working on establishing with her. It's different with the older kids. Yeah, soothe, helping the child calm down when distressed. So they don't know how to self-soothe, immediately. They do need us to help co-regulate with them. as a parent. I mean, that's part of attachment is there is a whole physical component, to child development, right? There's all kinds of studies that if kids, when they're born and are babies, don't get physical touch, they can actually, wither developmentally, right? Like it's so important to
Yeah.
have human touch, to have skin time. So in the beginning here with young kids, it's super important for us to be able to regulate ourselves and then for us to be able to help them co-regulate because and bring down that big emotion. So one of the keys here is, and I've learned this with all my kids, is in the moment. Well, I wasn't very good at this at the beginning. I'm much better now. Is in the moment when there is something big that they're emotional about, that's not the time to teach them, right? There's
Right.
all kinds of stuff going on in the brain, right? Where they're hijacked, they're in their primitive state. And that's the time to help them learn how to regulate. And I need to be able to be in a good place myself. And then together be able to bring that emotions down. And then once they're calm and backed into a soothed place where they feel safe and secure, then you have the opportunity to actually talk about what it was like. Oh, that, how did that feel? Do you think it's a good idea to have, thrown your toy across the room or thrown it at somebody or come and, hit me? Um, so that's, yeah, working on self-regulation, soothing. And then the last one is, yeah, security, creating consistent caregiving to foster security. So am I being consistent in my actions with them? If I'm not, if I haven't done my work and I'm all over the map in terms of how I show up with them, then they're not going to feel secure. They're going to start to feel inconsistent. They're going to, again, start to develop anxiety around, "Well, I don't know what's appropriate here. I don't know if I should be showing my emotions. I don't know, So, anyways, yeah, there's a lot of ways that we as parents, as dads, can learn how best to show up in order to support our kids and help them develop and show up to have the best opportunity for feeling safe, seen, soothed, and secure, and grow up to feel and have a secure attachment.
Yeah, I'm relating it to something, I guess, when you think about like what Tony Robbins teaches with his 6 human needs of psychology. So we all have like 4 base needs, what he calls the needs of the ego. One is certainty or comfort, and the other, it would be variety. It's kind of almost the opposite. He's sort of variety or uncertainty, and then the other is significance and connection and love, and then the 2 needs of the spirit, which goes growth and contribution. And one of the things that often comes up with a lot of people is that they'll have two, like we have two, like our driving, two kind of driving needs that are just very subconscious a lot of times. And for a lot of people, I find that I've seen him work with, that I've worked with, 2 driving needs are certainty and significance. So they want to feel seen, they want to feel understood, they want to feel like they matter, and like they want to know like what's happening in their life. They want to feel certain. And so I can totally see if someone is from a young age has not felt secure with the people that were supposed to take care of them and supposed to love them the most and supposed to see them the most and all of that, then yeah, so we're then looking for that sense of security, that sense of certainty in everything else because we haven't gotten it before, and we want to feel like it's also like we're significant, like I matter, like what the things that I'm doing. These are things that are okay. These are things that are, yeah, like I matter to life. So Tony teaches that our greatest fear, everybody's greatest fear, is that we are not enough, and that if we're not enough, then we'll be unlovable. Like not just unloved, but unlovable. Like that we're not worthy of anyone loving us because we have just fallen short. And I can totally see, like with our kids, that if they have these just weird attachment styles to us, the ones that are supposed to shepherd them into life as productive members of society and just people that can fend for themselves and survive and thrive in this life, that yeah, because be like, well, is it because of me? Like oftentimes we've heard through stories and movies and things, like when parents go through uh, divorce or they separate, that the kids will often blame themselves. Like, is it something about me? When I mean, I know when I have disagreements and my wife and I have arguments, like it's not about the kids, but they could see that. I can totally understand. They can see that and be like, whoa, like am I at cause of this? So it's like, yeah, it's there's a lot there. So like, how would you? One of the things as you're talking through that, some of that, and I don't know if this is just cultural conditioning, or because we were both born in the 70s, like the late 70s, like this idea that when we are feeling any sort of anything, that's like, okay, don't worry about it, you're fine. And this idea of really being a little bit more myopic on our children's feelings and how they're doing, as without necessarily consideration for the rest of the world, like that could turn into like a lot of coddling, like that what they're feeling is the only thing, right? Like we saw, I remember seeing a thing. There's this woman or this child that was having this complete meltdown. It's like a 3-year-old or something like that on a plane, and the parents were like just allowing it to happen. They're like, yeah, well, I mean, he's just figuring himself out. He's just having some big emotions, and yet it's affecting everybody else on the plane. And so it's like, yes, there's a time and a place to have these big emotions, to get it all out. But and then a child is then understanding or is learning that it's my feelings over everything, every time, all the time. So they could then develop into this weird, like, there's like this weird sense of entitlement, like all the world is for me. And so now we were into this weird thing in culture that it's like trigger warnings for everything, and it's like, well, you can't say this because it offends me or it hurts my feelings. And that like it's like, in trying to focus more on our own emotional well-being, there's this one side of the people that seem to be like, they're far less resilient, they're far more just far more entitled to thinking that like life revolves around them. So you know what I mean? Like, have you seen
Oh
this?
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I got what I think I got what you mean. Like, yeah. So I think, I hear two parts to that. One is, yeah, I guess you could misinterpret this. I think what you're saying is to say, oh, I'm just letting my kid be emotional. Like I'm allowing them to express their emotions, and they're allowed to do that, and you all have to just, accept that.
Mm-hmm.
Which, on an airplane, may be totally difficult. What I, what I, my piece of that would be, it's not necessarily about them expressing it, whenever they want, wherever they want, and just letting it go unchecked, because that's not going to feel safe for that kid either, right? Because some of these things are big, right? And to just feel, if to let them just go, and vomit it on everybody else isn't helping them necessarily become secure. Because, my opinion, what needs to happen is they need to learn how to deal with those emotions. Like, yes, I'm feeling them, and how do I, deal with them in a way that it doesn't get out of control, and doesn't necessarily affect everybody else in the room, because it doesn't need to. But, at 3 years old, okay, but, that's the parents' role, though, is to help them. There is a co-regulation piece there, especially when they're young. They shouldn't just, 3-year-old, 7-year-old shouldn't just be left to themselves to go through that emotional experience on their own. And I wanted to just, there are some really good techniques here for helping ourselves and kids self-regulate. And it can happen at a very young age. Is the first thing is to just notice and name those feelings. And I'm realizing that, through my own ability to do this, and working with our youngest with this, is she can now name, like, oh yeah, I get really upset easily when I'm hungry. And she says, she'll start to melt down. She's like, I'm hungry. She knows that in the morning, if she doesn't get food pretty soon, she's gonna get hangry. The other night she had a big meltdown at bedtime. She's like, I'm just so tired. Like she's at least starting to realize where these emotions are coming from
Mm-hmm.
and the part of it that she can start to deal with. And then there is the take a breath piece. So breathing techniques and all of this, the other big piece is to start to set this up proactively. Like that 3-year-old on the plane, like, maybe with more awareness from the parents and the kid, there were going to be things that they know would potentially cause an upset. And so you can start to, I mean, all this work needs to happen proactively, like setting things up so that it's going to limit the amount of blowups that are going to happen and giving them these talks and these techniques ahead of time so
Mm-hmm.
that when things escalate, that's not the time to try and teach them how to breathe, right? The breathing happens before. So they're learning in little overwhelms how to develop that technique. And then they're able to have a much better chance. I mean, same with us, right?
Yeah.
We have a much better chance if we've learned these things to bring it to a situation that becomes emotionally overwhelming.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyways, yeah, there's a bunch more physical movement. Like that can be a really big thing, right? I know for me, when I start to get really upset about something and I have the opportunity, I'm going to go for a run. Like that's one of the biggest things for me to, well, I'm breathing, I'm out in nature. That's going to help me work through something that's difficult. And then taking breaks, teaching the importance of taking calm time. That's not an imposed timeout, which used to be a technique, and I know it still is used, but like working with them to realize that ideally that they'll be able to take their own time and go, I'm really upset right now. I just need to go to my room, or I'm really upset right now. I need to go to my calm cave. Um, or again, if it's in an adult relationship, I just let's take a break right now, like we're both really upset, like how important that can be to work through your own emotions, to be able to self-regulate and then come back and have a more constructive conversation. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
anyways, in that case, yeah, I don't, it's just interesting how emotions can start to be weaponized. A kid could learn that, oh, if I have this giant tantrum, I get what I want, or if I get this, I get to just be however I want, wherever I want, whenever I want. Yeah, I think that could be a misinterpretation of this work. It's more about, yeah, you've got some big emotions. I can understand where they're coming from. Let's work on how we get back to calm here. And I'm going to teach you how to do that eventually on your own. And now let's talk about that. That wasn't necessarily the best way to perhaps handle this on the airplane. What do you think? You know what I mean? Like there's a whole coaching moment after that. But if that never happens, like if the parents never take the time after that event to sit down and figure out how that can not happen the next time, then yeah, we're not doing our job, I think, as parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's the other piece that when you look at, say, the masculine and feminine, what say stereotypically guys like men and women, how we relate differently in that, let's say you and I will tend to be a lot more logical. And so when something comes up, we just want, like, we just see like, okay, we'll just do this. Yet, the feminine looks at it much more relationally, much more, emotion based. Like there was that old, I think it was from 10 or 11 years ago. There was that little short film called It's Not About the Nail. Remember that one?
Yeah. Oh yeah,
So
classic. Yeah.
for anybody who hasn't seen that, you got to go check that out. It's amazing. But yeah, this woman, spoiler if you haven't seen it, this woman has literally a nail in her forehead. There's a nail plugged up in her forehead. And she's talking to her boyfriend or her husband about, she's like, oh, I just feel this, there's like this intense pressure in my head. And he's like, uh, well, and she's like, stop interrupting me. And, she's just going through this thing where she just wants to be heard and feel validated for what she's feeling. He just wants to fix the problem because he's like, there's a thing in your head. Just take that thing out of your head. But the more that he tries to fix it by trying to get her to realize that there's something sticking out of her forehead, the more angry she gets. And the more he's like, oh yeah, that must be hard, the more she feels a lot better about it. And it's like, yeah, so often like we're just like, we miss each other because of how we think the other person should be doing things. Or yeah, like we'll get to this place of, well, like there's the problem right there. Like you're hungry, or but by invalidating, or that can come across as just invalidating of their experience. I have a hard time with that because it's like, well, logically, like I live more in that kind of logic part of my being. It's like, well, let's just fix it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I totally, I took engineering in school. I have a very logical way of looking at the world. And, I had a coach recently say to me, logic can dismiss emotion. And in that situation, like you're saying, like that woman, and no different than with, as I'm talking about with our 7-year-old, um, logic isn't what they're looking for at that moment. They're having an emotional experience. She's my 7-year-old's having a tantrum because someone moved her Lego blocks. So, logically I can explain to her, well, look, we can sort them again and it'll be totally fine. You'll still able to find the ones you want. But that's not, in that moment, that's not going to help her. That's not what she wants to hear. She's dealing with all this emotion of somebody messed with her stuff. Um, what she first wants is, let's go back to wants to be seen. She wants validation of her emotional experience at that time to be like, oh yeah, I can see how frustrating that would be. I'd be upset too. And just someone, helping her realize what she's going through is okay. And then let's help soothe that. So she's learning how to, okay, calm down and not, continue to be upset. And then, okay, now we can talk about it. And then we can get to that place where, oh yeah, you know what? This nail is really annoying. Let's take it out of my head, or let's move the blocks around here back again, and it's gonna be fine. That happens afterwards. But I think as guys, I think stereotypically we've grown up. Maybe you're in my generation grew up with not learning how to deal with our own emotions. At least I didn't. I'll speak with myself. Like I didn't learn how to deal with my own emotions all that well, and we were taught to just suck it up and get back on the field, wipe away the tears. Like I broke my collarbone. Like you can see it, like it's bent. I busted my collarbone playing hockey. I went to hit somebody, and the gates opened on the boards, and we both went into the bench, and so my collarbone snapped, and I was probably 13, 14 at the time. And the mentality is I stayed on the bench and I was gonna play the rest of the game, but this broke my collarbone. I didn't go back out because I was like, coach, this really hurts. And so, we're back in the dressing room and I'm trying to take off my shoulder pads, and it's super painful. So I take off my shoulder
Oh my
pads
god.
and I'm sitting there. I don't wear anything underneath, right? So I'm sitting there, chest bare, and the guy across the bench, the dressing room from me, looks at me. He's like, "Yada, what? Something? There's a problem here." And I'm like, "Oh shit!" So went to the the hospital, and they can't do anything. They have to put you in a sling, right? You can't put a cast on it. But I think for maybe a lot of us guys, that's the environment we grew up in. It's just suck it up and get back in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, that's what we learned, right? That was our, I didn't have anyone validating my emotional experience in terms of like, oh yeah, that might really hurt right now. Maybe that should be something that we should address. Um, so I just think that's where we default to, right? Is just logic, not not recognizing the emotional component of it. And I know for me, that's been a lot of my work is to become far more emotionally intelligent so that I'm aware of, even if, it's too late for me, even if I don't have these emotions that are coming up, at least I can recognize that they're important and coming up in others, be able to validate that piece. I mean, I'm still working on that. And then, okay, now from that place, we can have a much better conversation because they feel like, oh, yeah, he gets me. Like he understands that this is important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then, okay, eventually then we could have a logical conversation, but certainly not in that place where, as you're saying, right, one of us is coming with a logic and the other one's having an emotional experience. It's not about logic.
Yeah, and I think it's also important. I know for me, it's important to understand that it's not one or the other, but it's all of it. In that,
Hmm.
I think there certainly is a time to get back in the game. There is a time to just suck it up. There is a time to just really identify what it is that I'm feeling and be in it. Like I think about like for a lot of my life, especially going through challenges, I would tend to begin to identify as my emotions, as opposed
Mm.
to realizing that the emotion that I'm feeling is just that. It's just something that I'm feeling. And something that I remember learning from Sam Harris, going through some of his meditation programs, like learning how to meditate, like just being still and just not trying to think about anything, but all of a sudden a thought will come in. So it's like when a thought comes in, like you just recognize, like it's like ask the question, like where does that thought come from? Like a thought will just come into my mind, but so the thought is not me. A thought just kind of shows up, and then all of a sudden it kind of just leaves, and then there's another thought that comes. Like those are things that are fleeting, just like emotion. Emotions are very similar, or can be very similar, in that like it's not who I am. It's just something that I'm feeling, and we know that because, like you were saying, like one of the things that to help to self regulate is movement. It's like how easy it is to like, oh, I feel a certain way. If I do something different, oh, all of a sudden I feel something different. Like I feel different. Well, clearly there's something going on. Like so, clearly I'm not that thing that I'm feeling. So when I feel sad, I am not sad. And so, like Tony teaches a lot. Like we are not depressed. We do depression. Like it's in the actions that we take that really creates those things that we feel. And so just like when we talk about self-regulation and about our style of attachment, that those are all moldable. Those are not a death sentence just because I have a predominantly, say, anxious attachment style now. It doesn't mean that's like that I am anxious attachment style. Like that's just what I've done. That's been my behavior. That's not who I am. And I think for especially with our kids too, like that's something that I know that I really try to instill in my kids, is that they are not their behaviors. Like I am so easy on them, the person, tough on the behavior, because they're different things. And same with myself. That like when I coach with people, I talk to people about how amazing they are, but their behaviors may not be. Like that's what we like, the patterns in which we get ourselves into. Those are the things that we need to attack. Those are the things that we need to change. Those are the things that we need to address, with the understanding that inherently you and I and our kids and everybody else, we're amazing. You're incredible. You have so much limitless potential. It's just this thing that we've learned, this thing that we've kind of just held on to, this thing that we kind of put in our backpacks as we've grown up. And those can be changed. Like just because I have an anxious attachment style doesn't mean that I can't learn to be securely attached. And I think that's what a lot of people miss. Is like they're looking for the diagnostic, but not the prescriptive.
Mm.
Like they're looking for the label to try to quell their like, oh, well, this is why. It's like, well, now I have a reason why I'm like this, but not take the next step, like that prescriptive step. Okay, well, okay, now what do we do to fix it? Because I mean, ultimately, I understand being in that place where you feel, again, going back to another Tonyism, is that we feel like the problem that we have is pervasive, meaning is like all of a sudden we see the problem that is us, or this thing that that is everywhere in our life, and that is permanent. Like we don't see a way out. Like we don't feel like we can change it, and really, it's not. I mean, no problem is permanent. We are, and we're stronger than anything in that. So for anybody who's feeling, if you're like, oh my God, like I can realize like I have this awareness, like you said, like the first step is having awareness. That can bring up its own set of issues, because it's like, oh, I have realized like my entire life I've acted like this. And it can seem very daunting to take the next step to actually consider a more compelling future than the one that we've had, and feel destined, like it's our destiny to die an anxious attachment styled person, or anything like that. When really it's like, no, we can be better. We can do different. This is part of the learning. It's this unraveling, this unlearning, so that we can build upon something more. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge, man. Yeah, like the yeah, labeling, right? Like what I hear in what you're saying there is just how powerful labels can be and how careful we need to be with that with our kids and with ourselves, right? Like instead, whatever you put after I am is something to be very, very mindful about.
Mm-hmm.
I am anxious. I am insecure. I am shy. If those are the labels you're giving yourself, it's going to be pretty hard to change the behavior if you've already, imprinted yourself or someone else has, right? If you've believed what your parents said about you, you are, like you're saying, you don't want to label them. You want to label the behavior, and let's talk about that. But you are amazing. Like one of the ways to help children self-regulate is to help them with a positive self identity, giving them positive self talk, encouraging them to use affirmations like, no, I'm a great person. Okay, maybe my behavior right now isn't ideal here, but just, yeah, that idea of labels can become prisons, and to really make sure that we're not labeling our kids in a destructive or counterproductive way, not doing that with ourselves, becoming aware. I mean, that's a lot of this work, right? With Tony, with ourselves, is what am I saying to myself? Like sometimes we've just got this track that developed 40 years ago that we don't even realize that we're saying to ourselves. And oh my goodness, is that true? Like I know that's one of the powerful questions in this work that I know I've done, and with Tony as well, is like, is that really true? Where did this come from? Like, do I actually believe this? Maybe I'm not that thing that my parents kept telling me I was, or someone else, my teacher did, or whatever, right? Maybe I'm different. Maybe I am fill in the blank. Okay, now how do I address this behavior that's not working for me here? Or how do I address it with my kid that's not working for them? And it's not about, yeah, and it's certainly not about, I know one of the great teachers that I've had some help from, Gabby Bernstein. I really like her books and being
Mm-hmm.
in her talks. And one of the big things was like, yeah, it's not about not getting triggered. Like we're still going to have these tantrums and meltdowns and an emotional experience. It's not about not being triggered. Like we're not necessarily realistic to say we're going to be this, Zen Buddhist monk and just no one's ever going to be able to get me upset. No, it's about how, in her opinion, and I've seen this and I agree. It's about, and I can see with my kids, I can see with myself. It's how it's taking down the amplitude, I think, of that trigger. It's not off the charts anymore. It's, okay, I brought it down. I'm still triggered, but it doesn't hold the same energy over me that it used to. And then I don't let it go for as long. Like I don't get triggered and then, you know, never talk to the person for forever. It's no, it's okay. I'm triggered, not as triggered as I used to be. I know why I'm triggered. I've named it. Like I'm upset right now. I'm frustrated. I'm angry. I'm, what's sad, whatever it is. I've named the emotion. I'm bringing down the amplitude. I'm now able to shorten the duration of it. And now I can actually go back and have that conversation with that person and be like, hey, you know what? I'm sorry I got upset. And this is why I did. I don't think it didn't feel very good to me the way that was expressed to me. You can have a conversation now from a healthy, whole, calm place. And yeah, so it's not about not getting triggered. And it's about reducing the amplitude of time, and yeah, not labeling ourselves or our kids with stuff that's not going to help them.
Yeah, I often think about something uh, Dr. Jordan Peterson said, and I think I'm butchering his quote, but I'll paraphrase. Like he said, a weak man or nice man is not a good man. Like a dangerous man, a man that understands that he is there's a monster inside, like that can come out at any time, but he has control over that. Like that is a good man because he knows he's gone through and fought the battle within and has realized that he is much greater and has much more ability and much more range and much more depth than just this meek, sedated person who just tries to keep the peace. Like somebody is like trying to get, somebody who is a skilled fighter.
Mm.
One of the things that they are taught is to never fight,
Right.
right? Like
But they
it's
know.
it's and the people who are super skilled boxers, martial artists, like they're often the ones that know how to de-escalate without resorting to violence. Rather than, but they're the most skilled at it, and they're the most skilled at it to be able to never use it.
Right. Yeah.
And
I feel
it's
like this,
same with
I feel
us.
like
Like
this is a whole other,
we become better by recognizing, by amplifying our range of what we can feel and what we can recognize, what we're becoming aware of, and then take control of that and know that we are ultimately at is at cause of what unfolds next, and that we can choose. And that choice, I think, is such a powerful thing. Like, yeah, like this can go off the rails any second now, if I have, if I let go into this, whatever this emotion is, or allow this to become my identity. But I know that I'm bigger than this. I know that I'm more than this. I am a leader in my own life. I am a leader for my family. You know?
yeah, man. Well, I know we're at our hour, but I want to talk about that quickly. Can you go a bit over here?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I mean that around that whole concept right there around, that masculine power is what I hear there, and how to recognize it, how to own it, how to handle it. I feel like that could be a whole other conversation for us, maybe next
yeah.
week. Um and yeah, for me you're right. For me it's about honoring that part of us that as men, I think especially, if there's a bear that were to enter our home here with my wife and kids, like there's a whole part of me that's gonna, I feel like I could wrestle that bear and throw it out the door if I needed to, right? There's a whole part of us that has a primal instinct to physically in that environment to protect, to and so I think it's important to recognize that we have that, but then also have some very healthy ways to deal with that. That's what I'm hearing you saying. Like that fighter who's trained, who knows all of these techniques and has the strength and this power within them and has recognized that. Now, how do I make sure that I know how to deal with that though? As a skilled warrior, right? It's like Neo in the Matrix in the simulations, right? He's figuring out how to harness all of this power and capability that we all have as humans. I feel like this is one of those things. Like we have intelligence, we have power, we have all of this within us that gets grossly underestimated, grossly, suppressed, unused, and not a lot of times have a healthy way to recognize it and use it and channel it. And so you're right, like that meek person who perhaps hasn't even been able to recognize that they have this, to me, that yeah, that person could be unsafe because it's there. And if they haven't learned how to deal with it, it can come out at the wrong time. I feel like this is the people that all of a sudden they're like, oh, that was such a nice neighbor, and then they're on the news because they just snapped at some point. But we have this. I think it's important to recognize it, and I think it's super important to figure out how to handle it, right? How to have a
Mm-hmm.
mature way of owning it and be responsible for it. Yeah, I can get what Jordan Peterson is saying. I at least in terms of the work that I've done and in the company of men like yourself and some of these other men's groups that we've been a part of, there's this incredible power and capability that we all have. And how do we own that and how do we use it effectively?
Yeah. Like when Neo says to Morpheus, he said, I'll be able to dodge bullets. He says, when you understand the truth, you won't have to. Oh, I love that line.
Yeah, right. He's not needing to be violent. He realizes that, oh man, I have this incredible power, but it's just like I love it. He just gets to the point. He's like, you know what? No, we're gonna stop that now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But with such power, with such calm, I get that.
Yeah. Oh, man. It's great. All right, good. I'm fired up now. Let's go do the work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. Let's keep. We're in. I posted this on my Instagram recently. Like for me, there's no more important work than the work that happens within a household. Like just the work that we get to do for ourselves, the work that we get to do for our kids, with our wives, with it's just for me it all. That's why we're doing this, right? For me, it all starts at home, and it all starts with us, and then it starts with one step outside of us. These relationships we have here, and then it ripples outwards, right? Like I just had
Mm.
this thought as we were talking about if we were all just boom, magically amazing parents. I mean, no one teaches us really, right? Like the best example we have is our own parents, and they did the best they could, but they might not have had all the exposure to stuff that we do. But if everyone could, if we all learned how to be great parents through school, or if there was some parenting school, do you think like Tony Robbins would even be in business?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So true.
Like to me, so much of this, so much of his business is because we all have all the stuff that we grew up with that we didn't know how to deal with, and we got to go talk to somebody about it and go see somebody like him. And then I think, yeah, sure, there's the whole other level of, okay, optimal on top of that. Like, even if you perhaps had a great childhood, there's still how to then get to that next level of realizing all this power we have in us and developing that. But so maybe he would just spend less on healing and more on optimizing, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I love how Tony says that somebody had said, I remember somebody getting up at one of his seminars and he's like, Tony, you're so inspiring. He's like, my mission is to be like, just be just like you. Like, I'm going to get to where you're at. And Tony's like, that's awesome, man. Because by the time you get to where I'm at right now, I'll be 10 steps ahead again.
Right.
Because he's always trying to optimize. I love that. So I think it's something that we could all take. We're just trying to optimize. We never actually get there. It's all about the journey.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Okay, man.
Have a
Huge
great
love
rest
to
of the
you.
day.
Appreciate anyone who's watched this and have an awesome day.
Yeah, man. Ciao.